Hello everybody! Today we are happy to show you our analysis of Starbucks Rice Village. First, Starbucks location. This Starbucks is located in Rice Village. Rice Village is known for its shopping area with a lot of clothing stores, restaurants and cafes. It's also called Rice because of the proximity with Rice University, which represents well Starbucks' brand identity. Now, let me introduce you to our team. Emma and I, we are responsible for the introduction of this project, as well as for the visual presentation and the video and audio content. Next, we have William, who will explain Starbucks history, our product methodology, as well as our observation and analysis of the reviews. Then, we have Catherine, who is responsible for explaining the missions of the company, as well as identify the gap and provide our recommendation. Finally, we have Xavier. He will go over the brand identity prism as well as the semiotic square. Now, I'm handing over to Emma, who is going to present you our presentation summary.
Thank you, Lucy. We're gonna start with our schedule, Starbucks history, our analysis methodology, Starbucks mission, and finally, our brand identity prism. Secondly, we will go over our semiotic square, some data we've collected, Starbucks Rice Village customer reviews, some gap we found, and finally, some guidance to help Starbucks. Let's start with our monthly schedule. We decided to divide our visit in 3 different shifts. First, the morning shift from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Then, the afternoon shift from 12 to 3 p.m. Finally, the night shift from 4 to 7 p.m. This results to 10 hours on-site per person for a total of more than 40 hours. So now, William is gonna present you Starbucks history.
Thank you, Emma and Lucy. And now I would like to introduce Starbucks and provide a brief overview of the history of the company. In 1971, the first Starbucks opened in Pike Place, Seattle, and this is actually a photo of the first store. The 3 men pictured in this photo are University of San Francisco students who also happen to be the founders of Starbucks. Pictured from left to right, we can see Gerald Baldwin, Gordon Boker, and Zev Siegel. These 3 students started Starbucks with a single goal in mind: to introduce a high-quality dark roast coffee to the city of Seattle. In fact, before they opened Starbucks, they had to go out of town to get such coffee. Their dedication to this high-quality dark roast was evident in their menu, which looks a lot different from the current Starbucks menu. That's because they didn't have a menu, nor did they need it, because they only sold whole bean coffee, tea, and spices. For the classic siren logo that we associate with Starbucks, they took inspiration from Herman Melville's Moby Dick. This logo has gone through several iterations over the year until becoming the typical green and white siren logo that we all know today. In 1982, Howard Schultz joins the team. Howard Schultz becomes the CEO of Starbucks. And then, as legend has it, in 1983, Schultz went on a trip to Italy, specifically to Milan, where he was passionately inspired by the local coffee scene. He instituted changes such as adding espresso drinks and the green apron that we know today. More recently, Starbucks has made great strides in their goals to hire veterans. In 2013, they made a commitment to hire over 5,000 veterans and expand military benefits for their spouses. They went above and beyond this goal in 2019 and reported that they had hired over 25,000 veterans. In 2020, they renewed corporate sustainability goals and initiatives. These included fair trade coffee and contributing to local and grower communities. Also in 2020, in line with their sustainability goals, Starbucks rolled out strawless plastic lids. This was a direct effort to reduce plastic and straws in our landfills and oceans. So, we can also see enormous changes within the past 2 years. In 2024, Brian Nichols was named as the new Starbucks CEO, replacing Howard Schultz. In 2024 as well, Brian Nichols announced a goal, and this goal was to rebrand Starbucks as a more personal and service-oriented company. To accomplish this goal, in 2025 he started rolling back the menu. This includes taking off drinks that were redundant or that were unpopular. So, for our observations, we had a two-part methodology. The first part included in-store data collection. So what we did was that when we first entered Starbucks, we would step into line and record the time that it took us from the time we started in line to the time that we paid. We all ordered a hot latte. This represents a standard drink. It's not the slowest drink to make, nor is it the fastest drink to make. So we used this as a proxy for how long people were waiting on average for beverages. And we did this at different times of the day as well. And then lastly, we observed customer working behavior. That is, what are they doing when they come into the store? This we spent the first 20 minutes at the beginning of every hour doing this. The second part of the methodology is customer review analysis. Google reviews showed a total of 241 available reviews. Using the Review Flows website, we were able to export all of the Google reviews onto a document. In order to give a more recent image of how customers are enjoying their Starbucks experience, we only included reviews from the past 2 years. This meant that we were working with 56 total reviews. What we did next is we classified the reviews as either good or bad. A good review was a customer rating of 4 or 5, whereas a bad review was a customer rating of 1, 2, or 3. And while we were also analyzing these reviews, we identified key topics and dimensions of service that we would like to commend the Starbucks for, as well as suggest improvements. And now I'll pass it to Catherine, who will tell you all a little bit more about the mission of the Starbucks company.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to go ahead and talk about Starbucks' mission. Starbucks' mission is to be the premier purveyor of the finest coffee in the world, inspiring and nurturing the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time.
Thank you, Catherine. My name is Xavier, and I'm going to go ahead and go over the brand identity prism. The brand identity prism was initially invented by Kapfer, and the design of the brand identity prism was to take a brand and identify it across 6 different variables. On the left, we have the externalization, which are the easily observable factors of a brand, while on the right, we have the internalization, which are the factors that tend to be a little bit more difficult to detect and are much more intangible. First, we have the physical characteristics of a brand, which are the tangible aspects, which include earthy colors. It's very dynamically and bold in its green colors, minimalist, and a very aged industrial exterior. The relationship of the brand with its customers is it's very much about personalized service. They're congenial, anti-corporate, and a sort of confidant relationship that you don't normally find with your baristas. The reflection of the company is involved millennials. These are granola persons that are all focused on sustainability. They're very integrated with their environment, and they're all focused on making the world a better place. On the right, we have personality, which represents the parts of the brand and the way that they connect with their consumers. They're very laid back, they're alternative, friendly, yet still quality focused. While culturally, they have a very strong ESG initiative, very team ownership and options like stock options, and they're very much about diverse experiences that make the day, including putting messages on the cups. Finally, the self-image, which is how customers see themselves there, are the very creative, modern, and interconnected people. And now we're going to go over the semiotic square. The semiotic square was invented by Grimm to identify 4 key consumer groups based on observation, to identify 2 hidden groups that otherwise would have been missed. Based on our observations, we identified first leisure consumers who specifically go into Starbucks to chit-chat or perhaps meet somebody. Well, at the top, we have workers who specifically go to Starbucks to do their work, perhaps because they work remotely, or even they just have a virtual meeting, or they have some personal work to get done. On the right, we identified drink novices. Drink novices do not have very strong preferences. They might bounce around between menu items as well as drink options, and do not have strong and consistent drink preferences. Our last group is the coffee veterans, who while are necessarily experts, but are very consistent, reliable, and will often consume the same drink at the same location, perhaps even every day. These 4 groups fall into one of 2 distinct categories. On the left, we have consumer behavior, which showcases how the workers specifically go in there to do their work and drink their coffee, while leisure people are more motivated by socializing and a commitment to just relaxing. On the right, we have drink commitment, which shows veterans being very consistent and reliable with their choice, while novices are going to be much more fluid and not have a very strong commitment to one thing or another. It is at this point that we identified the first hidden group, which is based on the similarities between work and veterans, which we have working professionals. These people may actually be experts in their coffee choices. They specifically are going there to work, and they also have very specific preferences that might extend to more than just one specific drink choice. At the bottom, we have leisure and novice, and the group that we managed to identify that has nothing in common with leisure and novice is opportunistic caffeine seekers. These are the people that might specifically go to Starbucks based on its location, based on the free parking, or perhaps it's along their running route or from the gym. They specifically are motivated to consume caffeine, and it could be coffee, it could be tea, or perhaps even an energy drink. The key difference between them and novices is that they're just motivated by the caffeine content, not the actual drink itself. I'm now going to turn it over to William, who's going to start talking about the customer reviews.
Thank you, Xavier. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the individual customer reviews of this Starbucks. So let's start with the positive reviews. Here's an example of a positive review that we found on Google Reviews. I've bolded some of the terms and some of the words that I think are important to talk about. So for example, this Starbucks has been described as an oasis of calm, as having an atmosphere that is both lively and relaxing, as being surrounded by a variety of great stores, and as a pleasant pause. A second customer review praises the customer service and describes it as amazing, attentive, and exemplary. I would also like to put forth a disclaimer that out of the 56 reviews that we were working with, 52 were positive and only 4 were negative. This overwhelming amount of positive reviews suggests that this Starbucks is doing something correct, and therefore our 3 dimensions of service are skewed towards the positive reviews and less towards the negative reviews. However, we did try to incorporate some of the negative review comments into these 3 dimensions. Here is an example of a negative review that talks about how the location is busy, that talks about how the staff needs more training, and that there needs to be more consistency among the drinks. A second negative review cites service quality, saying that the servers were very rude and that this Starbucks needs better service. Based on these analyses of the reviews, I'm now going to go over the 3 dimensions of service that we have identified from these reviews and talk about them with how these Starbucks needs to improve, but also give credit where credit is due. Moving on, the first dimension we identified is ambiance. This refers to the inside of the store, the tangibles, the things that customers can perceive and feel. Second is the convenience of this store. This refers to how the store is a great location, how the store is a good stop, how the store has a large variety of shops around it that make it a convenient place to stop and get coffee. The third dimension is personability. This refers to the staff and the service quality as well as their individual dispositions. Okay, and now we'll talk about graphs and figures that we were able to create based on our observations in the store, as well as based on the analyses of the reviews. The first graph represents the average time we waited for a standard drink. As you can see, we are waiting between 2 to 3 minutes, and this time is relatively stable throughout the day. That is, morning, afternoon, and night, we're waiting about the same time for our latte. Graph number 2 shows the average time we spent standing in line at this Starbucks. As you can see, we averaged spending around 1 minute, regardless of the time of day, and sometimes even less than 1 minute. So based on these first 2 graphs, we would like to commend Starbucks. We feel like we are getting in and out at a reasonable time, and we're not waiting too long for our drinks. Figure 1 represents the frequency of purpose of each customer visit. Based on the observed customer behavior, we classified 3 different types of customers. The first being in and out. Those are the customers who are entering and are leaving after they've gotten their drink or food. These are people who are just coming for coffee or something to eat. Next, we have the work group. These are people who are getting their coffee, they're getting their food, but instead of just leaving, they're sitting down, they're pulling out their computer, pens, or pencils, and are doing work or homework. Next, we have the social group. These are the people who, similar to the work group, they get their coffee, they get their food, but instead of sitting down to do work, they sit down to have a conversation or they sit down to chat. Given that we observed over 200 customers, we were able to run statistical analysis in this particular instance. What we found is that there were significant differences between these groups. Specifically, we found that there were significantly more in and out customers than there were work or social. There were, however, no differences between customers coming in for work or for social reasons. On Figure 2, we can see the distribution of reviews as either positive or negative. As I mentioned previously, we had a total of 56 reviews, 52 of which were positive and 4 of which were negative. This corresponds to a 93% positive rating and a 7% negative rating. Figure 3 shows the distribution of the reviews according to whether they mentioned ambiance, location, or personability. As you can see, ambiance was mentioned about 15 times, location 12 times, and personability also about 15 times. What we were then able to do is figure out whether these reviews mentioned ambiance, convenience, and personability in a positive or in a negative light. What we found is that these reviews mentioned these 3 service dimensions overwhelmingly positive. However, there was a drop-off with personability. And now I will turn it over to Catherine, who will tell you about our gap analysis.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to go ahead and discuss the gap analysis. The gap analysis is a tool that is used to identify inconsistencies or breakdowns between the current and future business model. We can use this analysis to discover a business's strengths and to discover any areas in need of improvements. According to this model, there are 2 distinct types of gaps that may occur. The first gap, aptly named Gap 1, refers to design failures. This entails any inappropriate expectations of the service experience and/or outcome. The second gap, Gap 2, refers to delivery failures. These are inappropriate perceptions of the service experience and/or outcome. I would like to preface that this is based on personal observation, as well as the 4 negative reviews, which account for 7% of the distribution of positive and negative reviews as seen in Figure 2. That being said, we have come to the conclusion that this Starbucks location does not have a design failure. In other words, we did not notice a service gap. At first, we thought that their design failure was inconsistent product quality. But having not noticed this during our observations and having only read this in less than half of the negative reviews, we decided against this. I would like to reiterate that this decision was made based on our observations and the 4 negative reviews that we analyze. However, through our observation and review analysis, we did notice a service failure. For Gap 2, we've concluded that their gaps include inconsistent product quality and inattentive customer service. As we mentioned earlier, some of the reviews mention product quality. We noticed during peak times and periods of slow customer traffic, service declined as employees were focused on completing other tasks rather than being attentive to guests. Knowing this, we'll go over some recommendations based on our gap. As we mentioned earlier, some of the reviews mentioned product quality. The customer had placed an order for 2 identical beverage items and were delivered 2 different ways. Because of this, our recommendation is to implement quarterly knowledge tests and service standard reviews. The quarterly knowledge tests allow managers to ensure employees are aware of food and beverage recipes as well as preparation. This can help determine any miscommunication between employees and their food and beverage preparation. If there is no miscommunication, we also recommend managers reviewing ingredients to ensure that food quality is up to Starbucks standards. Lastly, in regard to inattentive service, we recommend managers to assign 1 employee who is responsible for taking orders and greeting guests as they walk through the door. This ensures that guests are always attended to while allowing other employees to complete tasks throughout their shifts.
Thank you so much for watching our video. Have a good day. Bye.